right, let's take a look at Parshas Bamidbar, page 726. Now, the book of Bamidbar, you would translate, your knee-jerk reaction is how to translate Bamidbar. How would you translate? The desert. Bamidbar, in the desert, but it's not. The book of Bamidbar is translated as numbers. I always wondered about that as a kid. Why is Bamidbar called numbers? Genesis, what do you call Bereshis is called Genesis, which I later found out is not only a rock group. It actually means the beginning, and I guess the rock group means it's the beginning of the end. And Exodus obviously means God, even though in Hebrew it's translated as Shmos, which is names, right? But it's all about leaving Egypt. Therefore, it's called Exodus. Vayikra is called Leviticus. In Hebrew, in the Medrash, it's called Torah Salavim, because it's all about the Levites' service, the Kohanim, the Levim, Korbanos, all that sort of thing. Therefore, it's called Leviticus. Bamidbar is called numbers because the Jewish people are constantly being counted. Several times they're counted, and therefore Bamidbar is called numbers, which we'll see at the beginning of the parsha in a moment. And Devarim is called Deuteronomy, which I was clueless on. Deuteronomy, I thought it just means they got deutered. But it does. So it was only later when I became older and much more sophisticated that I realized Deuteronomy comes from the word deuce, because Sefer Devarim is called Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah, because Moshe Rabbeinu repeats certain laws, and therefore Deuteronomy is from the word deuce, which means that it's the repetition of what Moshe taught. Now, take a look at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar. V'daber Hashem al Moshe Bamidbar Sinai, be'ol moed, be'echad l'chodesh hasheni, b'shana hashenis, first day of the second month of the second year, l'tzeisa be'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor. Now, this is the beginning of the second month of the second year. Gentlemen, keep in mind that the Torah goes from the second year, and then we have a gap of 38 years where there's nothing that's said, because then the Torah skips to the 40th year. So we're in the second year, and nothing is reported about the 38 years, other than later on the Torah will tell us where they went, the various places. But other than that, the Torah does not mention a word about 30 years. It hits a certain parsha, I think Parshas Korach, Parsha Shlach, and then we're into the 40th year already. They're into the 40th year, and then there's a decree that, at the end of the second year, there's a decree that they have to wander the desert till the 40th year. And then the Torah doesn't say a word till we get to the 40th year itself. So here we are in the second year. There still hasn't been a decree that the Jewish people are getting ready to go into the land of Israel. There's not going to be any hesitation. It's only when they mess up with the spies that there's going to be a decree that now you have to wander for 40 years. Okay? So that's the background. Now, the Torah says to count the Bnei Israel. Se'ues rosh kol adas Bnei Israel l'mishpach chosam. Take a head count of the Bnei Israel by their families. L'veis avosam. Now pay attention very carefully. Very, very tricky here. B'mispar shemos, by the number of names. Kol zochar l'gulgolosam. Every male by their head count. Gulgolos is a skull. In the first four letters of the word gulgolos, you'll notice is galgal. Galgal, which is a circle, because your head is round. Your head is round. And in Hebrew, a tire, a wheel, is called a galgal. Did you ever hear that idea? A wheel is called a galgal because one of the reasons, Gilgul, which means reincarnation, because the word galgal is a word that repeats on itself, just like a wheel. Gal, gimel lamed, gimel lamed. It's a word that repeats. It's just the same word over and over. And that's exactly the essence of a wheel. What is a gal? Anybody know what a gal is? Just a gal? A wave, which is the same thing. It keeps coming at you. Gal, then gal is a wheel, which is just that the wave keeps coming at you. In other words, it's the same idea. It's all there. It's all there. It's the same idea. And a Gilgul means a reincarnation. Reincarnation is something we believe in. According to the Kabbalists, you get 4 chances. You come around 4 times till you get it right. There are other opinions that you come around without limit until you get it right. And if you're particularly bad, a person is immoral or particularly bad, they could come back as an animal or as an inanimate creature, as a rock. It's a real drag. But you could come back as an animal, and the difference between coming back as a human being and coming back as an animal is that when you come back as a human being, you don't remember your previous incarnation. You don't remember your previous incarnation, even though people think deja vu Deja vu is it's reincarnation, right? Ever people say that? It's deja vu. Deja vu is just spacing out in drug flashback. It has nothing to do with reincarnation. I don't know who made that up. You know, some guy gave an excuse in class why he's spacing out. He said, "Hey, teacher, I was just back in Spain in 1591. You know, sorry, I'm back with you here. You know, so I don't know of any source that says that deja vu is reincarnation. And number one. Number two, we do believe in the concept of Gilgul, and if a person is particularly bad, they come back as an animal. When you come back as an animal, you remember that you were a human being. And now you're trapped in an animal body. So there you are, a dog running around under the table, and you're barking. You know, everybody's talking politics or sports, and you'd like to contribute to the conversation, and all that comes out is a bark. And then they say, oh, the dog's hungry, throw him a bread crust. Then you got to sit there under the table while your wife and her new husband are sitting there enjoying the meal. How's that? How's that for a good motivation to be good, right? How's that for motivation to be good? Yeah. So it's worthwhile. So when you're an animal, you remember that we're once a human being. That's part of the torture. Yeah. What's your name? Yosef. So Yosef, I'll give you another one to think about since you enjoyed that one. There's a source that's
just picturing my dog.
Yeah, you picture, you know, well, listen,
he behaves well.
Yeah, you got to keep it in perspective, because, you know, it's not like, you got to be careful. Sometimes people, you know, when you're alone with a dog and nobody's watching, you just kind of, you know, nobody's around, okay, come on, what'd you do? Tell me, what'd you do? You know, so we don't know about any individual given dog, right? But there is the kind of, my wife insisted that her dog was Jewish. He had a Jewish neshama, because when we used to come to her house from shul, so the dog would start barking madly and try calling everybody over to the kiddush table. You know, he'd run out of the room, he'd run toward the, come on, everybody, let's make kiddush, or he was just hungry for challah. Yeah, one or the other. Well, guess which one we paskin like. Yeah. So she was convinced that Pierre, the French poodle, had a Jewish neshama. So we don't know at any given point, but there is another source which I've mentioned many times in the past, also just to inspire us to be good in this world. A man could work and accumulate money his entire life, and leave the whole boodle, work his whole life, and he could leave the whole package for his children. If it was for his children, it wouldn't be so bad. Most people do that. What the source says is he could leave it for his wife's next husband. Yeah, it's worth being poor, huh, Aaron? Yeah. Oh, that puts things in a different perspective. My favorite example is Mr. Carey, who married Mrs. Heinz Ketchup. You know, if you would have told Mr. Heinz, whatever his name was, Klaus Heinz or whatever his name was, who made the ketchup fortune, that his money would be going for Carey's hairstylist and unsuccessful presidential campaign, Mr. Heinz would have eaten mustard. You know, so I don't think, so just think about that. Yeah, or join the kollel. Yeah, anything but to leave it to this guy. So that's what do you call it? That's a very sobering thought. Now, here the Torah says, take a head count of the Jewish people, b'mispar shemos, by the number of their names. Anything bother you about that expression? Alex, anything bother you about that? By the number of their names.
Shows it's not as individual as you would expect it, because people would share the same names, but then again, a name is specific to that neshama. So
very good. You're right on target. You see, you have an inherent contradiction here. What do you mean count names? If I ask you, let's take a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a count. If I say to you, okay, let's take a count by names. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. I didn't count anything. Everybody mentioned their names. I didn't count your names. What does it mean by the number of the names? It doesn't make any sense. It not only doesn't make any sense, it's inherently a contradiction in terms. So the answer is exactly what you're saying. The answer is that the Jewish people, the Torah is teaching us a very important, of course you count, there's a head count over here. But the Jewish people have to know, you have a dual role in life. You have a dual role. There are two roles that you have in life. You are part of a collective group called the Jewish people. And we don't live as individuals. We live as part of a group. We daven in a minyan, and we live in a community, and we do everything together. A number, anytime, if I assign you a number, you're number 14. What does that tell you automatically? That there was a 13 before you, and possibly 15 and on after you. You are one of a group of people. That's b'mispar. But shemos, there is nothing as personal as your name. That means you are an individual, have an individual role. No person, why is the first mitzvah of the Torah to be fruitful and multiply? So the basic idea is, well, no people, no mitzvahs. If you don't have people, so you can't perform mitzvahs, they'll be to serve God. But it's even more than that. There are no two individual people in the world history ever, under any circumstances, who have the exact same task. Because no two people, even brothers from the same family, no two people have the same personality, the same life circumstances. You can have twins, identical twins, but one was born before the other. You now have to live life as the younger one, and you now have to live life as the older one. That means you're not identical. You don't have identical life, so you don't have identical temperament, you don't have identical anything. Therefore, no two, you are a shame. You have an individual task that no one before you or after you could possibly fulfill, because you have your own unique life circumstances. A shame, as he mentioned, the word shame, shin mem, in the word neshama, your soul, the two middle letters are shem. That means your name is a description of your essence of your neshama. That means your name is a description of your role. Two people could be named Chaim, and two people could be named Yosef, and two people could be named Mordechai. Right, but each one has a description of the essence of his neshama. And when parents name a child, we have a tradition that parents at that moment are inspired by Ruach HaKodesh. They have some sort of divine inspiration to help them name the child. Even though they've made a whole calculation, there was Uncle Charlie, whose name is Chaim, and there's Grandpa Joe, whose name is Yosef, so we'll call the kid Chaim Yosef, but I really like Yosef Chaim better, so we'll pull out the other R, and anyway, Grandpa gave better gifts, and so you put Yosef Chaim, you have a whole calculation there. Ultimately, it boils down to a form of inspiration. The only exception is if you give him ridiculous names. Sometimes people give a kid, in modern Hebrew, they call a kid Nimrod. Nimrod is like naming a kid Haman. Haman Goldstein. Nimrod rebelled against God. So that's not. And you have Israeli Bali Chuvas. They take on a Hebrew name, while they didn't have a Hebrew name. But ultimately, so what the Torah is telling you here is we're going to count the Jewish people, but keep something in mind. Keep something in mind. You're an individual because you have a name, but you're a number. You're part of a group, and we have a dual role in Klal Yisrael. Each one of us has to actualize our own individual potential, but we have to stay within the parameters of the group. Now, I want you to turn very quickly. Just turn to, read one more pasuk, then I just want you to see something later on ahead. It says, Ben Esrim Shana V'mala, from 20 years and on, pasuk Gimel, Kol Yotzei Tzava B'Yisrael, anybody who went out to the service of the Jewish people. In this context, it means the army, but Tzava does not literally mean army. Tzava means the service. Tifkedu Asam L'tzivosam, you must count them by their hosts, Ata Ve'aron. Now, I want you to turn ahead to page 4, to pasuk 44. It's on page 730. And this is after everybody's been counted. After everybody's been counted, so it says like this on page 730, pasuk 44. It's about 12 lines to the bottom of the page. So it says, Eile ha-pekudim, these are, how does the article translate pekudim, the numbers? These are the countings. Asher pakad Moshe ve'Aaron u'nesi Yisrael, Moshe, Aaron, and the princes, Shnei Mosar, each 12 men. Ish echad leveis avos hayu. There was Moshe, Aaron, and 12 men who helped with the counting. And then look at the next pasuk. Vayu kol pekudei b'nei Yisrael leveis avosam. The count was bi ben esrim shana v'mala kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael. The count of the 20-year-olds who go out to the tzava, and then the Torah tells us 603,550. So one of the commentators asked the following question. We just saw in pasuk Gimel, it says from 20 years and on, they're going to go to the army. They're going to serve the Jewish people. Why, when it summarizes it here on pasuk 44, why over here does it say again, they were counted by Moshe and Aaron, all the 20-year-olds who are going to go to serve? Why does it repeat it? The Torah doesn't waste words. Why does it repeat it? So one of the commentaries says like this. You see, there are two ways to count the Jewish people. We could be counted qualitatively, and we could be counted quantitatively. Well, what does that mean? So I'll give you two examples. When the Jewish people went in, they fought Jericho. They fought the Battle of Jericho. After they fought in Jericho, they then went to a city called Ayin Yud. And when they went to the city called Ai, Yoshua had been promised that they're not going to take any casualties. And the Jewish people fought Ai. They were repelled on their first attack, and 36 people died. And Yoshua said, why'd you do this, God? Why? I thought nobody was supposed to die in these fights. And it turned out there was a sin because they had made a ban. Nobody was allowed to take anything from the city of Jericho. And one man Achan ben Carmi, he took from Yericho, and therefore there was a prosecution against the entire Jewish people. So the Gemara says it wasn't 36 people who died. It was really one man who died. But he was on such a high level that he was considered like the majority of the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin 71, he was like 36 people. And there's another Gemara that says Moshe Rabbeinu is compared to the entire Jewish people. So when it comes to counting the people qualitatively, you know, if we were assigning numbers qualitatively, you're a 10, 8, 14, 6, 1, minus, some people are negatives, I don't know. But, you know, qualitatively, you know, you're 20, 40. How many people are in the room over here? We got 700 people in the room. I only see 15 people. No, there's 700 because, you know, there's 50 over here and 25 over here. As human beings, we can't do that. Only God could count qualitatively. And there's even a verse in the book of Hosea that says the Jewish people are so many, like the sand of the sea, they can't be counted. What do you mean they can't be counted? The Torah says count them. They're always counting the Jewish people. What do you mean they can't be counted? The answer is, qualitatively, a human being can't count us. Quantitatively, we could be counted. It's just a question of how many bodies there are. But who could count you? Only a human being could count you, only quantitatively. What was this count over here for? We need to know body numbers. How many people are going into the land of Israel? They're going to divide up the land. They're going to go to the army and they're going to fight. We need a body count. Therefore, the Torah emphasizes in verse 44 as a continuation of the original count. The Torah says they were counted by Moshe and Aaron, human beings. And therefore, what kind of count is it? It can only be a quantitative count. It can't be a qualitative count because it's human beings. And therefore, it emphasizes, and why was it a quantitative count? Because we need kol yotzei tzava. We need to know how many people are going to the army. That's the idea. But ultimately, the ultimate value of a person, we don't know how much anybody is worth. We don't know how much anybody is worth. So the Torah says that only God could do. Only God could count qualitatively. Quantitatively, that's our job. Therefore, they take a head count. Somebody had a question.
Well, it's not a good question, but is this
How
why
do you
Jews
know?
are accountants?
What's that? That's why Jews are accountants. Yeah, like, something about it. Yeah, it is a profession. You know, you find a lot of Jews in accounting, much more than in the NFL. That's true. I don't know why that is, but that is. You know, that's certainly true. They also say, you know, why Jews are habitually late. You know, they talk about you have a bar mitzvah or a wedding, it always starts late, right? They always talk, and each group thinks that, well, we're Hasidim, we're really late. You know, we're Persians, we're really late. Everybody prides their group on being the latest. You know, well, we're Litvaks, we're really late. Everybody prides their, except for the German Jews, the Yekis, who are always on time. Everybody else is chronically late. So they say, there's a joke, they say, well, what happened, there was one time in history, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain, and Moshe Rabbeinu was late coming down, and people got nervous, so they decided to worship the golden calf. That's what happens when you want to expect people to come on time. You end up with a golden calf. So since then, we haven't cared about time. You know, Jews always come late. That's what they say. The German Jews are very punctual. By the way, they use the yeki. They use the word yeki in the vernacular as almost as a negative description. He's a yeki. I don't think that being punctual is negative at all. I think being punctual is very respectful, and I learned it from a yeki. Because I was in Bnei Akiva when I was young. I was in Bnei Akiva, so we had a meeting at somebody's house, a meeting of this council of sages. And so we're driving to somebody's house. So the guy, the shliach, was an Israeli guy who was a yeki in the roots. We got to the house. The meeting was called for 8 o'clock. We got there 2 minutes to 8. So 2 minutes to 8, I started opening the door to the car, and he grabbed my arm. He said, the meeting was called for 8, not 2 minutes to 8. Right, which is very, very proper because, you know, maybe you know, somebody's with the last minute preparations. They're expecting at 8 o'clock, not at 2 minutes to 8. There's a boy comes to the yeshiva, so he gets to davening late. He comes about 3 minutes late to davening. So his yeshiva comes over and says, Herschel, how come you were late? He says, Rebbe, I'm not a yeki. And he says, well, you're not a yeki. You could come 3 minutes early. And, you know, it works both ways. Yeah, you're not a yeki. There's like the story they tell about the guy, the yeki who says to his wife, I'll be late for davening today. I'll be late home from davening because we're starting to say Mashiv Haroch Mori Hashem. So I'll be late. Yeah, I guess that is 4 extra words in davening, you know. So I'll be late coming home. So you know, there is too much, but being punctual is a proper show of derech eretz and respect for other people. Okay, take a look at Posuk Aleph. Let's go back to Posuk Aleph. I'll tell you a medrash. I'll tell you a very interesting medrash. Okay? the midrashim, just to give you a taste of what a medrash is, the medrash will sometimes use the pasuk as a springboard for a completely different thought. And there's a classic book called the Medrash Rabbah, which is the most comprehensive medrash on Chumash. And the medrash at the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, Torah starts with the word Bamidbar. So the medrash at the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar says, and it makes an enchanting statement. The medrash says like this: the Torah was given through three means that the Torah was given through. The Torah was given in fire, it was given in water, and it was given in the desert. Torah was given through three things. It was given through fire, through water, and through the desert. Now, what does that mean? Torah was given through fire, through water. I mean, what can that possibly? Where do you see fire, water, desert?
Burning bush.
Okay, close.
Flood, Noah's flood maybe.
Good. The Yam Suf. The Jewish people had to cross the Yam Suf. They jumped into the Yam Suf, right? And the desert is literally given in the desert. So one of the commentaries on the Medrash explains like this: the fire refers to Avram Avinu being willing to be thrown into the fire at Ur Kasdim. Remember, Avram Avinu was thrown by Nimrod, who we mentioned earlier. Avram Avinu is thrown into a fire by Nimrod. And then you have the Jewish people who are willingly go into the Yam Suf. By the way, it wasn't a party. The Jewish people are told, okay, start walking into the sea. And the Medrash says the water came up to their neck until the water split in a raging sea. And then it's what do you call it? It's referring to a midbar over here. Okay, so one of the ideas here, probably the most basic idea that the Medrash is trying to tell us, is that a person sometimes has to sacrifice for Torah. A person has to sacrifice for Torah. And there were Jews who learned Torah under the most trying circumstances. Rabbi Akiva learned Torah in spite of the Roman decree not to learn Torah and to teach Torah. There were Jews in Russia. Do you know that in Russia they started a Baal Tshuva movement right under the noses of the communists? They had a Torah teacher. There were people, rabbis went to Russia incognito. A couple of rabbis from Or Sameach. They went incognito, wearing baseball caps, shaved their beards, and they taught these Russians, these refuseniks, Torah right under the nose of the communists. You have to be willing to be Moser Nefesh for the cause. And a Bamidbar is certainly to follow Moshe Rabbeinu out of Egypt. They say, Tzeischem acharei Bamidbar. You followed me out to the desert. That's certainly an indication of what we call Mesiras Nefesh, a certain amount of being willing to sacrifice for the cause. The rule in life is anything you sacrifice for, you're going to be devoted to. If you sacrifice for something, you will be devoted. The devotion of parents to children is greater than the devotion of children to parents, because parents sacrifice more for their children. Parents sacrifice their sleep, they sacrifice their money. I think statistically to raise a kid to 18 years old, how much does it cost? I think they cost about $800,000. What's that?
$250,000.
Oh, at least. That could be boys. You haven't had teenage daughters yet. Yeah, I think it's about $800,000. So you get paying for clothing and for this and for that. What? No. That's without going. That's before university. What you got to pay for kids. Parents sacrifice for children. Parents sacrifice for children. When kids really demand a lot of sacrifice. But when a kid comes over, Daddy, I broke my glasses. How'd you break them? Well, I wanted to see how far they could bend, and they can't bend as far as I thought. And he can't get. And the kid's got to have glasses. You're just gonna have to pay for glasses. You're gonna have to pay for the glasses. And by the way, realize that when you're a father, don't go flying rough every time the kids break something. You did too, first of all. Second of all, accidents happen. And when they happen, it costs you money. And you are a walking accident also. The same father gets upset with his son because he lost $10. And the father makes a bad investment in the market and lost a couple of thousand. I never hear him yelling at himself. He just goes, "Oh, what was I thinking? What was I thinking?" And so you have to realize, kids, it's a sacrifice. You sacrifice for Torah, you appreciate it a little bit more. In our day and age, you don't have the greatest sacrifice. Nowadays, you don't have to sacrifice anything. You go to a yeshiva, and you have a beautiful state-of-the-art dormitory, and you have what do you call it? Food that you wouldn't know if you closed your eyes if it wasn't made by a French chef. In the lunchroom over here, maybe you should close your eyes. But whatever it is, this is nothing. This is nothing. In Europe, when they were in yeshivas in Europe, guys slept on benches and shuls, and guys skipped meals. They didn't have where to eat. We got it rolled out. Okay, I don't say that yeshiva food is necessarily the best. It's enough. You could always eat bread. You're not hungry. You don't have to be hungry. It's not much of a sacrifice. You know where you're going to sacrifice in life? You want to educate your children? You know what you got to pay in tuition? You know what you got to roll out nowadays for tuitions in America? You know what tuitions could cost you on the East Coast? I don't know, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000. And my cousin's in Los Angeles. He was telling me about his daughter goes to high school. He told me the tuition is $32,000. I said to him, sure, because that way you get a tuition break and you pay $18,000, which is what they really want. He said, no dice. He said he gets a tuition break. He pays $28,000 out of the $32,000. He told me it costs him more to enroll his daughter in a Beis Yaakov in America than it does to send his other daughter for a year of seminary in Israel, including the plane flights and everything else. That's how much it costs. And so you send your sons to yeshiva and you pay for it, you'll never regret it. You'll never regret it. You're sacrificing for Torah. You'll reap the benefits, and maybe down the line, but you'll reap the benefits down the line. Parent sends their child off to Israel to learn in yeshiva. It's difficult for a parent to say goodbye to a kid. He goes off to yeshiva. That's a sacrifice that you make. When you say, the Medrash is teaching us over here, there are 3 ways to acquire Torah. Fire, water, and Bamidbar all mean a certain level of self-sacrifice. It's difficult. Yeah, I'm not in the mood to learn. Sometimes a guy wakes up in the morning, I'm not in the mood to learn. Of course you're not in the mood to learn. I had a Rabbi in yeshiva once said, anybody could learn when they feel like it. The trick is to learn when you don't feel like it. Anybody can learn when they feel like it. The trick is to learn when you don't. That's a sacrifice for Torah. That's a sacrifice for Torah. By the way, there's another statement that says, one thing with difficulty, tov echad b'tzar mimeya shelo b'tzar. That means if you learn an hour with a headache, it's like you learned 100 hours. Problem is, you got to be careful telling this to guys in yeshivas because you got, hey, Chaim, I haven't seen you for a couple of days. Yeah, well, I did my quota for the week already. When? Well, Sunday morning I had a headache. I learned for an hour. That takes care of 2 weeks of learning. I'll see you. I'm going off to Eilat. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful who you say this to. But this applies to anything. You get up in the morning, you really don't feel like going to shul. Some guys just love leather at 7 o'clock in the morning. Other guys, I don't feel like going to shul, putting on tefillin. Yeah, and if you do, it's like you daven 100 hours. And if you do a chesed for somebody, it's a difficult chesed, like you did 100 cheseds. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu calculates it. But you have to know they have to sacrifice for Torah. That's what it's teaching you. That's what Bamidbar Sinai is. Okay, one last idea. In Pasuk Gimel, so it says like this: Mi ben esrim shana v'mala kol yotzei tzava. 20 years old, you go off to the army. Okay. I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this whole concept of army in every country in the world. They go to the army at 18. The draft is at 18. I mean, you put 18s and 19-year-olds out in the army. They certainly haven't got the judgment. And hopefully they got a guy who's telling them what to do. But you're talking about people who are very vulnerable to emotion. You talk about teenagers. Essentially, they're teenagers, which are some cross between children and humans, right? And nobody has determined exactly what a teenager is. And you're putting a gun in their hand, you're sending them out, and then they got to go make life and death decisions. Problem is that who should you send out? You send out 26-year-olds, they have a family with 2 kids, So who do you send out? Who do you send out for potentially a difficult problem? The Torah says from 20 years and on. From 20 years and on, you join the army. So on the plain level, that's what it means. On plain level, that's what it means. But there's a different level. The different level of understanding is, at 20 years old, you become accountable to God in heavenly law. That means all the prohibitions of the Torah, there's a certain amount of, I have to be very careful here because there is certainly no dispensation. But a teenager who's out of control and he sins, he's less accountable to God for what he's like, because after all, he's not in control of himself. He's not yet fully mentally, emotionally settled. At 20 years old, you become fully accountable for your actions. Now, don't confuse that with capital punishment. Capital punishment applies to 15-year-olds as well, and it has to, because a 15-year-old could sometimes be in an adult body. We can't have somebody in an adult body running around killing people and being violent. So the only way to control him is by letting him know that if you do that, you're going to die. That's a language everybody understands. But as far as his decision-making process, that process does not reach full maturity until he's 20 years old. What's fascinating is, when does a Jewish male become a man? At what age? 13. You'll notice that how many years are there from 13 to 20? 7 years. Everything in Judaism is a cycle of 7. It takes 7 days to celebrate a yontif. It's 7 days for a person for maturity, 7 years for maturity. It's 7 days, 7 years for the Shemitah cycle, 7 days of the week, 7 days for a mourning period, sitting Shiva. Sitting Shiva. So what's that? 7 weeks until you get to Shavuos. It's always in units of 7. 7 is the basic unit of completion because there are 7 days of the week. So a person goes through a cycle starting at 30, okay, girls at 12 years old, because girls mature emotionally much sooner than boys do. Some boys don't mature. Girls mature at 12. Some boys don't mature until they're about 49. But girls, that's the Shua cycle. But essentially, it's a 7-year cycle till you hit 20 years old. Once you hit 20 years old, at that point, you are now fully accountable in heavenly law, because at that point we can, and therefore the Torah is alluding to that over here. Mi ben esrim shana v'mala, from 20 years and on, kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael. At that point, you're joining the service. At the point that you're 20 years old, you're joining the service, because that's when you are accountable in heavenly law. But up until 20 years old, there is certain consideration for the fact that a person is not yet fully emotionally mature. Therefore, their decisions are going to be governed much by their body, much more by their body than their intelligence. Okay. All right, well, I realize it's late. We'll stop here. Okay, continue tomorrow, Mr. Hashem.